Om. Om. An altered state of consciousness is any kind of change in your awareness produced by things like sleep or meditation or hypnosis or drugs. It's basically just any kind of deviation from that normal, awake, alert state. Now, I've already talked a lot about sleep, so let's talk about a few others. First of all, meditation is a mental exercise that we use to produce relaxation or to heighten our awareness. Now, most forms of meditation look pretty similar. Like you're supposed to sit there quietly with your eyes closed and your spine erect, kind of like how I demonstrated at the beginning of this video. And when you put your body in that kind of position, what's going to happen is your body's going to have like a relaxation response. So that's where you're just going to start to feel very, relaxed. Your muscles are going to become less tense and so on. So it definitely can be a pretty pleasant experience to meditate. And that's why most people like to do it. But there is definitely different kinds. So you have, for example, Zen meditation, which is when you sit there quietly and focus on your breath. And then there's Hindu meditation, where you will repeat a mantra like Om, for example. There's Tao meditation, where you're supposed to clear your mind of all thought. And then you could also definitely consider like Christian, Muslim, like prayer to also be a form of meditation, because you're basically doing all the same things. If you have trouble meditating, or if you just don't really get much out of it, if it's not very relaxing for you, you might benefit from what's called sensory deprivation. So sensory deprivation is kind of like when you force yourself to go into this meditative state. It refers to any kind of major reduction in your sensory stimulation. So like if you were to put on a blindfold and earmuffs so you can't hear or see anything, you might find that to be a pretty relaxing experience. But if you were to have access to something called a sensory deprivation chamber, you would be able to cut off most of your senses. Like this sensory deprivation chamber is generally, it looks like a little capsule that you can climb in and lay down, and it's halfway full with water. So when you lay down, you're floating. That way you don't really feel anything. Then when they close the door to the capsule, it's dark and you can't see anything. It's also mostly soundproof, so you can't hear anything. So most of your senses are completely shut off, and like I mentioned before, that's going to make your body go into this kind of relaxation response, which can be very, beneficial in many different ways. Of course, if you remember when I was talking about Zeitgebers, I mentioned that we set our internal clocks based on stimuli in the environment. Well, when you're doing the sensory deprivation, you don't have those cues, so it's really easy to lose track of time. Like a half hour in a sensory deprivation chamber could seem like hours to you. Now, there's another way you could do this. You could actually have somebody help you enter this meditative state, and that's what hypnosis basically is. Hypnosis is an altered state of consciousness that's characterized by intensely narrowed attention and increased openness to suggestion. In a previous video, I talked about this pseudo-psychology of hypnosis. Like, hypnosis as a mind control isn't really legitimate, but hypnosis as kind of like an assisted meditation is definitely a real thing. So in reality, people do need to cooperate. Like if you don't want to be hypnotized, you won't be. It's that simple. And when people are hypnotized, what we're going to see is like a basic suggestion effect. So people are just more likely to agree with you and more likely to go along with your suggestions. Like if you were to take somebody who's hypnotized and say, I really like the smell of this new perfume. What do you think? And then you have them smell it. They would probably say, yeah, I like it as well. Even though in reality that perfume was ammonia. Like they just smelled ammonia and agreed with you that it's a pleasant smell. So that's what I mean by they're more suggestible. But they're not endlessly suggestible. Like if you say, I think it would be a good idea if you go jump off a cliff, the hypnotized person's just going to say, no, that's not a good idea. Now, different people can be hypnotized to different extents. Like we have different levels of susceptibility to hypnosis. The people who are the easiest to hypnotize and can be hypnotized the deepest, we call hypnotic virtuosos. But that's a very, really small percent, like 10% of the population. Most people are somewhere in the middle. So it's kind of like a normal curve, a bell curve, where you have a few people up at one extreme, and then you have a few people at the other extreme. Those people wouldn't be able to be hypnotized pretty much at all. So if you do undergo hypnosis, it can be very restful. It's similar to meditation. It can also affect your memory. Like people who have been hypnotized, we know that it can help them to bring back old memories, but it can also kind of interfere with or contaminate those memories as well. So it can also be used to just pretty much block memories. Like it can produce brief amnesia, for example. So it's important to be very careful when you are under hypnosis that your memories aren't contaminated. But hypnosis definitely can't unlock hidden potential. It can't give you superpowers. It can't force you to do things or produce age regression. All that stuff that you may have heard about before or seen in a TV or movies. It's purely fiction. But if you have seen something like that in the real world, if you have seen something that looks like hypnotic, like control, that's most likely just a simulation of hypnosis for entertainment purposes. So we're talking about stage hypnotism. Like something you might see if you go to Vegas or something like that. So stage hypnotism generally does include some hypnotic effects, but the primary reason why people are getting up on the stage and acting silly is more so due to various kinds of social influence. It's kind of like a social psychology experiment. So pressures like conformity and obedience and compliance and things like that, those are the actual reasons why people are clucking like a chicken or whatever. And the way that basically works is, these stage hypnotists, they usually do certain kinds of things. Like they invite people to come up to the stage. They don't force anybody. And what kind of person would volunteer? Well, the kind of person who wants to have that kind of an experience. And then once the person gets up on the stage, now the entire audience is watching them. The entire audience is judging them and seeing how they are, performing. And the, volunteer feels that pressure. Volunteer knows that they're supposed to act silly. They know that they're supposed to be obedient to the hypnotist. So they go along with it because, violating those expectations, not conforming to what the audience expects, would make it really awkward and would really make everybody uncomfortable. So just, going along with that social influence is much easier than not. If you want to see more about how stage hypnotism works, I have a link down in the description below. This is a video of a hypnotherapist just talking about, stage hypnotism versus, actual hypnotism. So definitely check that out if you're interested. But there's a few other kinds of altered states of consciousness I also quickly just want to mention, like out-of-body experiences, for example. This is when you have the sensation that you're kind of floating outside your body. It's almost like you can see yourself from somebody else's point of view. And this can be caused by all different kinds of things. It can be caused by brain damage, mental disorder, drugs, and so on. Comas. Comas are another kind of altered state of consciousness. It's a state where you basically cannot be woken up for an extended period of time, at least 6 hours. And this can be caused by the same kinds of things that an out-of-body experience can be caused by, mental disorder, brain damage, drugs, so on. Panic Panic is definitely an altered state of consciousness. It's a sudden sensation of intense fear that suppresses your logical thinking skills. And it's considered an altered state because when you're panicking, like I just said, you're not really fully aware and able to rationalize things. And panic can be caused by either the perception of some fearful stimulus or just the belief that some fearful thing is out there. Another interesting thing about panic is it can actually be very contagious. So mass panic can result from one person panicking, maybe for a legitimate reason, and then other people just kind of reacting, kind of like mimicking that person's panic. They probably won't even know why they're scared. They'll just start panicking, basically, because it's contagious in that way. Psychosis, that's another altered state. This is a term that refers to somebody who's kind of lost contact with reality and is experiencing like hallucinations and delusions. And this can be caused by many different things, from drugs to sleep deprivation to, mental disorder and so on. And then here's just a short list of a few other ones, like derealization, for example, which is when the external world seems unreal. It's kind of like, this is the Matrix. And then there's delirium, which is kind of a severe confusion and disorientation. And ego death, that's when you lack a sense of control over yourself. It's almost like you're just a passive bystander watching your body, like kind of automatically, live your life. Like you don't really have control over your life and the things you do. Euphoria, that's like an intense feeling of well-being. Hypnagogia, that's that transitory stage you have from being asleep to being awake. Various kinds of spiritual experiences, you could call them revelations. That's when you just feel like a sudden and intense kind of connectedness with something kind of spiritual, or maybe just a connectedness with the world or the universe or whatever. And then there's syncope, which is basically just, passing out.